Start game now.
Welcome, retro fans, to another edition of the No Swear Gamer. Today I'm joined by my Atari 2600 controller because we're going to take a look at the Atari TV Games plug-and-play system made by Jakks Pacific. Has a copyright date of 2002 on it. This little plug-and-play unit really helped launch plug-and-play popularity in the early 2000s. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, there were some dedicated home systems, especially Pong type systems, that were a little bit popular. That was at least until the Atari 2600 came around and kind of replaced them. So it wasn't until the early 2000s that people got nostalgic, and this little guy right here helped launch a mini industry featuring several other systems of this type. Yeah, it is a very cool looking unit. Looks just like an Atari 2600 controller. It is slightly larger, but for the most part it has the same kind of feel and look to it. So unless you had them side by side, you may not even notice much of a difference. Let's go ahead and take a look at this unit here. Has a on-off switch. That's operating just well. A reset button, a select button to select which game you want to play. When you go into different games, you can have variations, and that's what this is for. And a start button to start your game. Also runs on 4 AA batteries in this little compartment that is opened by a screw, which is kind of nice. Means you'll never have to worry about it popping open and spilling out the batteries. On it, it says adult assembly required, because if there's one thing children shouldn't handle, it's screwdrivers and batteries. That is a bad combination. Remember that, folks. So yeah, it has a nice TV Games logo. Has your standard 1 audio and 1 video cable to it, as well as comes with most of the units. But yeah, feels kind of nice. Now inside, it basically has what I believe is called NES on a chip technology, or Nintendo on a chip. So even though it looks like Atari, inside what you basically have is a little Nintendo program running. So basically they had to program the games like they were running on a Nintendo. And this does create some problems you'll notice in the video when I get to playing some of the games, especially in the sound department. The graphics will look pretty much the same, but the sounds are going to be off if you're very familiar. Now, if you haven't played Atari in a while, you may not notice the difference. But if someone is an enthusiast, kind of imagine like this. Imagine you found a Harley Davidson motorcycle, you got on it, you turned it on, and all of a sudden you heard the sound of a Honda engine. Yeah, it'd be a little bit different, and you're going to see some differences here if you are familiar with the Atari 2600 sounds. They're a little more harsher, and I kind of like it that way than what you're going to hear in the video, but it still plays pretty well. Let's go ahead and plug this into my television set and see just how fun this little unit can be. The Atari TV Games plug-and-play unit has 10 games on it that you can access by a very easy-to-navigate menu. Once you select the game, it'll give you a little description of each game and a little bit of info on how to play it. So that's kind of neat. It doesn't just throw you in there blindly. The first up is Adventure. In Adventure, you are a free-roaming post-it note that uses spears to kill ducks on your quest to find a glowing jacuzzi that you want to take back to your home. Or something else, something like that. No matter what the story, Adventure is a very fun game. It's one of the best games on the 2600, and in my opinion, it is the best game on this unit. It is pretty much like a precursor to The Legend of Zelda with the overhead map and the fighting and all. Very fun game, highly recommended, whether you play it on this system or the Atari 2600. Next up is Asteroids. In Asteroids, you're put in a spaceship and your job is to shoot a bunch of rocks. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? And no matter how well you do, eventually you will be destroyed. It is based on the arcade hit of the same name, but of course it's a little bit different. The arcade original was based on vector graphics. This one has a little bit cruder graphics, but they're in full color instead of black and white. And I actually kind of prefer them over the arcade. I actually prefer the gameplay over the arcade as well. You know, that's pretty much standard fare for Atari 2600 games. Arcade games were made to swallow your quarters, so even though they can be fun in spurts, the typical arcade game lasts about 90 seconds, where an Atari 2600 game will usually last longer and is a little bit more enjoyable, at least in my opinion. Asteroids is a fun game on this unit, and I would recommend it. Of course, just like with all the games, the sounds are off, so it depends on your toleration for the differences in the sounds, but gameplay-wise, it's still fun. Next up is Breakout, also based on an arcade game, but the arcade game used a little knob to move back and forth, and the Atari 2600 game used a paddle controller to move back and forth. In Breakout, you control a little paddle at the bottom of your screen, and your job is to bounce a ball back and forth from the bottom to the top without letting it go past you as you hit all these different rainbow colored blocks ahead of you on the top of the screen. However, there is a problem with this game, as with all the paddle games that are on this unit. There's a total of 3 games that originally came on the paddle controller. The cool thing about the paddle controller is it gave you great precision and allowed you to move very, very quickly. But when you translate that to a joystick, it doesn't work very well at all. And I didn't have much fun in this game because it became just way too frustrating to control the panel even early on in the game. So this one I'm going to pass on. Centipede is next. Centipede is another arcade hit made by Atari. In the arcades, it used a trackball, which is basically like a cue ball installed into the cabinet itself that you can roll really quickly to move your cursor around the screen. The trackball is most famous today in the Golden Tee games, which by law must be in every American sports bar in the United States. That's right. So Centipede uses the trackball controller in the arcade, but when they ported it to the Atari 2600, they translated it for the joystick. And even though it may not be as good as the original trackball to some people, it actually plays pretty well. So even though, yeah, it's not the original controller, it still plays pretty well. The sound was really off in this game. In the 2600 version, whenever you shot your laser, you got this really loud shooting sound, but in this version, it's almost nothing at all when you shoot, and that did take away some of the enjoyment in my opinion, but I still liked Centipede. Circus Atari is next, one of my favorite, if not my favorite, paddle games. Yep, another paddle game brought to the system. In Circus Atari, you control a seesaw or a teeter-totter that goes back and forth, trying to help 2 circus workers jump all the way to the top of the screen and bust balloons whenever they touch them, going back and forth. It is a very fun paddle game, and it is actually the best paddle game on this unit, even though it is still difficult to control. Because your little teeter-totter is so long, it is a little bit easier to aim with this one. So yeah, it's an okay game, but still not as good as with a paddle controller. Gravitar is next. Gravitar basically introduces gravity to the game Asteroids in a sense. You basically have a ship that's very similar to the Asteroids ship, and you start on a large overhead map where gravity is always in effect. On the large overhead map, there is a sun in the center that's trying to pull you into the center, and there's several different planets and areas you can enter in from the map. Once you enter one of the areas, your job is to blow up all the enemies on that map, but the problem is gravity is pulling you down. It is shown from a top-down perspective, the down being the ground, the top being the air. The only problem is your gun is at the nose of your ship, your thrusters are at the back, so if you want to use your thrusters, you have to point your gun straight up, but in order to shoot the guys below you, have to point straight down. I found this to be a pretty difficult game, pretty hard to navigate, and wasn't that enjoyable, at least to me, and it wasn't one of those games that I was familiar with back in the Atari 2600 days. Missile Command is another popular game, also used to use the trackball controller in the arcade, and made a great translation to the Atari 2600 and is pretty fun here as well. Yep, once again the sounds are off and may affect some people, affected me a little bit, but it's still a good time to be had with Missile Command. It is a pretty depressing game because you're trying to protect a bunch of towns from this missile onslaught that's coming from above, almost like a nuclear attack, but no matter how good you do, eventually you will die, and so will all the people you're trying to protect. So yeah, it's a little bit depressing if you think about it that way, but gameplay wise, it's a pretty fun game. I enjoyed this one. Pong is next. Pong was basically the first big arcade game that Atari ever made and really helped propel the Atari brand. So it's kind of a no-brainer that they would bring it to the system. I'm guessing that's why they brought Pong and Breakout, even though they're both paddle games to the system, is because they had name recognition. But again, it suffers from the ability to be controlled by a paddle, and your paddle here is very, very tiny. Pong is basically virtual ping pong. You are the paddle on the right-hand side of the screen, and you're trying to get the ball past the paddle on the left-hand side of the screen, except your paddle is very tiny and very hard to move with the joystick, and being single player only, it's not that fun. So I'm going to pass on Pong. I believe this comes from Video Olympics game cartridge on the 2600. They never did release just Pong to the best of my knowledge. Next up is a real interesting one. At least it was when I first played this unit when I got it in the early 2000s, and that's RealSports Volleyball. Probably one of the lesser known sport titles on the system. I was kind of surprised that they didn't put something like basketball or maybe even home run baseball. For as much criticism as it gets, it was pretty popular when it first came out. And volleyball is not that popular of a sport, at least compared to other sports like football and soccer, so it was a real curiosity. In RealSports Volleyball, it's basically a beach volleyball game. You control 2 players at a time. The top guy, of course, protects the top half of the beach volleyball court, and the bottom guy protects the bottom half, but there's a little barrier in between so they can never cross over, so you have to use a little bit of judgment. But overall, I found this to be simple and fun, and I really, really enjoyed my time. It was a surprise when I first played this one. I think RealSports Volleyball is a little bit of an unsung hero as far as sport games go on the Atari 2600. So yeah, it was a pretty good time. Yars Revenge, one of the greatest games in the 2600 library. It was made by Howard Scott Warshaw, who also did E.T., largely considered one of the worst games in the Atari 2600 library and one of the worst games of all time, which I kind of refute in my review of E.T., which you should watch right after this video. It's a great review. But yeah, Howard Scott Warshaw did Yars Revenge just to show exactly how good of a creator he could be if given the time and the resources. In Yars Revenge, you control a flying space wasp, and on the other side, your enemy is basically the head of a spatula 1 minute and a flying buzzsaw the next. Your goal is to eat away or shoot away at his barrier and shoot him with a large, colorful missile. Now, the missile is gotten anytime you either touch the spatula head portion. If you touch the buzzsaw, you will die. Or if you eat away at the barrier, which you can do just like a bug would do. You can also shoot away at it with a little projectile from your mouth. Once you create a missile, you can shoot it by pressing the fire button at any time, and if you make a direct hit, the screen explodes into all sorts of glorious colors and you escape out of it. An interesting thing happened during this time when I was playing it. I actually think I experienced some slowdown when the screen exploded. Usually on the 2600 you could fly your little fly around quickly back and forth, up and down while it was exploding just for fun, but on this system it seemed to hiccup a little bit and have a little bit of slowdown, which was kind of surprising that the Atari 2600 was able to handle this, but a Nintendo on a chip could not, or at least they didn't program it well enough to do it. But nonetheless, this is a very, very fun game. It takes a little bit of getting used to. It does have a little learning curve to it, but overall, I enjoyed it. Overall, this is a very family-friendly system, unless you think too much about killing those ducks. Well, actually, they're dragons. Does that make you feel better? Or you think about the impending doom of Missile Command, but other than that, this should be fun for kids of just about any age, if they can get past the very archaic graphics. And it is controlled very well. I really enjoyed the controller on this. On eBay, these units typically sell for used about $10 or less, and that includes shipping. I don't believe they make these anymore. They did make them for several years, probably about a good 10 years or so, but now these kind of plug and play units are going off the market, and only like these light gun games are being put in their place, or the Golden Tee variations. I'm not really seeing very many plug and play units anymore, especially by Jakks Pacific, the creator of the TV Games lineup. So would I recommend this? Well, you know, it is cool, but the problem is there's lots of ways nowadays to play different Atari 2600 games. The Nintendo DS, as a matter of fact, has 2 great greatest hits versions that I would recommend over this. And of course, you always have the original. But if you're just looking for a simple Atari unit to pick up and play just a few of these games that you're nostalgic for and you don't care about the sound quality issues, then, you know, yeah, I could recommend it. And what I would probably recommend is just look out in like a thrift store or garage sales and see if you can get one for $5 or less. I think that it would be a worthy price for this unit. You're probably not going to find new units anymore unless you pay a premium. So used is the way to go. Mine has been working for all these years. I got it when it first came out and hasn't given me any problems at all. But of course, like I said, there's other units to play Atari games on as well. So it just depends where you're at as far as that goes. Where would I rank this? I've done one other plug and play review. In episode 14, I covered the Miss Pac-Man Namco arcade plug and play unit, also done by Jakks Pacific. And how would I rate these two if I were to rank them against each other? Which one would I put ahead of the other? Well, the Miss Pac-Man unit had better graphics and sound, and the emulation was done better. The joystick was cool, especially for pole position, but the problem I had with the Miss Pac-Man unit was it was so arcadey that very quickly. I would lose my game within about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and you had to start over from the beginning. You couldn't continue where you left off, and that kind of put a bad taste in my mouth. It was fun for a little bit, but then after a while, when I realized I couldn't get anywhere, I just was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to put this down. Where the Atari one has just a little more gameplay to me. I really dig adventure. It has 3 different modes of difficulty where they increase the mazes, and all the other games based on the arcade hits that aren't paddle controlled, like Asteroids and Centipede and Missile Command, those were fun as well. So I think there's a little bit more gameplay mileage in the Atari 2600 TV Games unit than there is in the Namco one, even though it has full-size arcade games in it. So just because of that reason, because of the playability and just more enjoyment, I'm going to put this Atari TV Games unit ahead of the Miss Pac-Man Namco unit. So there you go. Thanks guys for giving me a little part of your day. I really enjoyed having you here. Don't forget, you can like me on the Facebook. You can follow me on the Twitter. You can also click the like button on this video. That would mean a lot to me, and so would clicking on the subscribe button as well. Anyways, I thank you again for giving me some time, and I look forward to seeing you right here next time on the No Swear Gamer. Take care, everybody.